A little-known backstory about Washington, D.C.'s Cardinal Robert McElroy. Incidents from his past that he would rather have buried and forgotten, neither of which I will do, of course. All that and more in this episode. Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. So we recently broke the news that Cardinal Robert McElroy is banning altar rails in Washington, D.C. A priest whose identity I will protect passed on the minutes of the priest meeting to me, and he expressed disappointment that the Cardinal was forbidding altar rails because this priest had planned on reinstalling altar rails in the future. Now he and his fellow brother priests can't. Of course, this priest takes his vow of obedience to his bishop seriously, and he will, of course, obey. But Catholics are upset, and I'm going to show you those meeting minutes pretty soon. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Most Americans have no idea what's happening to Christians in the Holy Land. The descendants of the very first Christians, the people whose families have lived in the land of Christ for nearly 2,000 years, are being pushed out of their ancestral homes. In parts of the West Bank, Christian families report increasing harassment, threats, property seizures, and violence. Many fear that if they leave, even temporarily, they'll never be allowed to return home. And if these communities disappear, Christianity could disappear from some of the most ancient sites of Christendom, the very places where our Lord lived, preached, died, and rose again. That's why I support the Vulnerable People Project. There are few nonprofits that I would recommend more than the Vulnerable People Project. While most international organizations left the area, VPP stayed. They delivered food, water, firewood, and emergency aid to Christians trapped in Gaza. They evacuated wounded children and vulnerable families. And today, they're helping Christian communities survive throughout the Holy Land. And at risk to their own safety and lives, they've had their own warehouse full of baby formula bombed. They've had at least 2 of their workers killed doing this work. Now, the Vulnerable People Project is working with leaders in Washington to bring attention to the persecution of Christians in the West Bank, and they're demanding action before it's too late. President Trump has spoken often about protecting religious freedom around the world. Now, Christians in the Holy Land need that protection. Please go to SaveWestBankChristians.com right now and sign the petition calling on President Trump and Ambassador Mike Huckabee to defend vulnerable Christian communities before they disappear forever. That's SaveWestBankChristians.com. Before I show you the minutes, you might ask, why do you keep banging on about Cardinal McElroy, Christine? Aren't there more important things in the church and the world to discuss? Well, I keep banging on about him because people need to stop acting like it's business as usual in the church. And my fear is that that's exactly what's happening among a number of Catholics, especially since McElroy was elevated to, like I said, arguably the most important see in the U.S. It was, quite frankly, a scandal that happened, especially in light of multiple things that he has said and done, some of which I'll dig into in this episode. Things that people are maybe unaware of or might have long forgotten, and which McElroy likely once long forgotten. And just a note, remember that it was Pope Francis who appointed McElroy to D.C. It was not Pope Leo, it was Pope Francis. And in fact, at the time, Cardinal Robert Prevost, he was head of the dicastery for bishops at the time, and apparently McElroy was not his choice. He had somebody else in mind, so did a lot of other people. But Cardinal Cupich and Cardinal Tobin had special access to Pope Francis, and there is evidence that there was a meeting. There was a meeting between Pope Francis, Cardinal Cupich, Cardinal Tobin, and Cardinal McElroy. It's not clear what they were discussing, but shortly after that meeting, Pope Francis decided to appoint McElroy to D.C., going with Cupich and Tobin's choice, and against the recommendation of other senior prelates in the church. So my understanding was that McElroy was not the man that Prevost had chosen, nor the man that other senior prelates wanted in D.C. But for whatever reason, Francis chose to listen to Tobin and Cupich and appoint McElroy. So it was a great scandal at the time, a great disappointment. Like I said, one of the most powerful sees in the entire United States. And again, why does any of this matter? Why are we talking about this? Because it is the garbage for years that McElroy's done, and people of his ilk like him have done and are doing in the church, that are driving people out of the church, or preventing people from coming into the church, or driving Catholics into the arms of sedevacantism, or into the arms of the SSPX. I take the same position as Cardinal Raymond Burke, Cardinal Robert Sarah, Cardinal Gerhard Mueller, former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that there are many serious problems in the church. I'm highlighting one of them today. That's what my reporting has done for the past more than 10 years. I've highlighted many of the problems of the church coming from people in the hierarchy. And we continue to highlight them. We continue to report on them. We continue to be honest about them. But we do so within the church. We fight for reform of the church inside the church. That's my position on this, and that's their position as well. And I sincerely hope that the SSPX will take the same position and not go forward with these consecrations that will incur automatic excommunication. They know fully well the consequences, the canonical consequences of this. Consecrating a bishop without papal mandate, very serious. They know the consequences. And, we just need to pray. We need to pray for unity. But again, like I said, my position is you fight for the church inside the church. Now, let's get back to the relevant portion of the minutes of this clergy meeting. I'm going to read from portions of this document. All right. Altar rails policy. Clear directive. No installation or reinstallation of altar rails. Rationale. Considered a permanent structural change, not a local pastor level decision. That's interesting because most other dioceses leave it up to the individual parish and priest to make those decisions. They don't impose a straitjacket liturgical rule on every single parish, every single priest in their diocese. McElroy, of course, is doing just that. Continuing, could shift the norm of liturgical practice from standing to kneeling. Temporary altar rails are also discouraged. Kneeling practices, individuals may kneel, accommodation is acceptable. So there is at least that. Concerns raised about use of kneelers potentially disrupts flow and safety. Risk of turning exceptions, kneeling into the norm. So in the United States, the norm, the liturgical norm for receiving Holy Communion is standing. So they're concerned that they'll turn the exception of kneeling into the norm. No strict enforcement policy at this time, left to pastoral discretion with caution. So no strict enforcement. Here's the thing. If the cardinal is truly concerned about safety, about people tripping and falling, then removing altar rails actually increases the risk of tripping and falling. Because there are some people, especially elderly people, people with bad knees, people who may be overweight, who have a harder time getting up off the ground without the help of altar rails. Forcing them to get up off the ground without any help is far more likely to cause them to trip and stumble and fall than altar rails. So I don't buy it, Cardinal. I don't buy it, and I doubt any sincere Catholic does. The Church has been using altar rails for more than 1,000 years without issue. And it wasn't until the mid-20th century when a few forward-thinking individuals, thinking that they knew better than the Church's centuries-long practice and wisdom, decided they'd do a new thing. Check out the altar rails. Check out the kneelers. Let's start standing instead. So anyway, this news about DC naturally has led to an explosion of backlash online. Catholics are very upset. We know about Bishop Michael Martin in Charlotte, North Carolina. Catholics are very upset about what he's doing. He's doing the same thing, ripping out the altar rails, ripping out the kneelers, insisting that everybody stand. Now, I've done extensive reporting on Cardinal McElroy going back years and years. I reported on him back when he was in San Diego, saying outrageous things like that climate change is a more pressing issue than abortion. He actually said that. Or when he opposed the U.S. bishop inserting in the voter's guide the language that abortion is the preeminent issue. He opposed it. Thankfully, he and his little cabal of 11 or so bishops were outvoted by the vast majority of bishops, and that language is inserted into the voter's guide. And for my understanding, the recent plenary assembly, they had another vote on this, and they will be inserting it again in the voter's guide. Good for them. Or back when McElroy held listening sessions in San Diego in 2018. That was after the Summer of Shame. We all remember what that was. That was when news broke about Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, that he turned out to be a serial sexual predator. And by the way, McCarrick occupied the very same see that McElroy is occupying right now. Washington, D.C., considered the most powerful cardinal in the church at the time. He was called a kingmaker because he was the one who made bishops, because his word was so powerful in Rome. Turns out to be a serial sexual predator, but not just that. Everybody knew about it and stayed silent. Some of them were even complicit. I also reported on, in fact, I broke the news that Bishop McElroy ignored the warnings of the late sex abuse expert Dr. Richard Sipe, who sent McElroy a detailed letter about McCarrick's crimes back in 2016, and McElroy ignored the letter, refused to meet with Dr. Sipe afterwards. I broke that story in August 2018, and it spread like wildfire all throughout both Catholic and secular media, forcing McElroy to issue a response. What was his response? Oh, he claimed he didn't meet with Sipe because, they were just rumors at the time. That's what I thought anyway, and so I just, didn't want to meet and talk about rumors. Okay. Even though other bishops say that everybody knew. Everyone knew. The seminarians knew. Bishop Stephen Lopes, when the Summer of Shame, broke out, that scandal broke out, he said, we all knew. Everybody knew. And, he didn't buy it with all the bishops clutching their pectoral crosses and, I'm shocked. They all knew. But because of all the concerns expressed by Catholics in San Diego over the McCarrick scandal, McElroy held what he called listening sessions. And these listening sessions were more like propaganda sessions. It turned out to be a total joke. The attendees were intimidated by armed guards. The bishop actually had people thrown out for simply asking questions. Watch, I have a clip right here of two young men. They didn't even have the chance to ask questions. They were thrown out immediately.
Okay. Oh, no, I don't.
We have a good talk about.
All right, good to see you. Thank you very much. Hey. Why are you taking my friend?
Huh?
Why are you taking my friend?
Because last time he did something on the other church.
What did he do? What did he do?
Please.
Why are you removing me? Why are you removing me? Why? Why?
Just walk. Hey, come on, bro. Just walk. You don't want more people here. Believe me.
Why are you removing me?
Because
why are you removing me? They're gonna remove my friend. I'm like, why did you?
Well, did he do anything?
No. Didn't give me a reason. Didn't give him a reason.
Did you say something, or what did you say? You had to do something. They wouldn't just kick you out. I wasn't born yesterday. What happened?
I just went inside.
Okay, did you say something, show something on your shirt?
No.
Did you do anything?
No.
I don't know why
they just don't like my friend.
Was your friend still in there?
Yeah.
The bearded man is diocese spokesman Kevin Eckery. He's the one who apparently gave the order to throw out these two young men. He recognized them from a previous listening session where they had asked Bishop McElroy uncomfortable questions about homosexuality in the clergy. And as we know, the statistics show that about 80% of all priest sex abuse is homosexual. So you would think that the topic of homosexuality would be relevant And that at these listening sessions where the bishop claims that he was there to listen to the concerns of the faithful, specifically over the sex abuse crisis in the church, these two young men ask about the problem of homosexuality in the clergy, thinking that, yeah, this is relevant. We're concerned. What are you doing about this? And what does McElroy do? He bans them from coming into any future listening sessions because they ask these questions. As we see, they were thrown out. And the one Catholic who was there, who witnessed the confrontation, said it was disgusting, her word. And she went on to say, quote, "It felt like we were in prison. The way the security guards surrounded the room, and any false move meant any one of us would receive the same treatment." At another listening session, an abuse victim stood up, someone who was abused by priests. He told his story about predatory clergy, and then he challenged the bishop to ask what he was going to do to fix the problem. We have audio of that. Here is a short excerpt.
"I can't believe a reasonable man would ignore Dr. Sykes' letter to you. Someone sent me that letter. I'd make it my life's work to, one, disprove this crazy man and his theories, or to rid this evil from the root of my church. It's worldwide."
Now, during his talk, he got shouted down by some people in the room. So his 15-year-old daughter gets on a chair and she asks everybody to be quiet so her father could continue speaking. And what happens? She gets confronted by armed guards who throw her out. Now, we used to have video of it. I don't have access to it anymore, unfortunately, but she's asking, why am I being thrown out? Why am I being thrown out? And they won't tell her. And she tells them, I'm 15, and they don't care. And they throw her out. Her father is an abuse victim. She's trying to get everyone to listen, and they throw her out. And this sort of thing happened at multiple listening sessions. Multiple people were thrown out simply for asking the bishop challenging questions. The whole thing was a joke. They tightly monitored who could enter, who could ask questions, what kind of questions. Armed security, men with guns, flanking each corner of the room, and Catholics sitting there feeling intimidated, afraid, scared that if they asked the wrong questions, they might be next. And at the end of the listening sessions, McElroy published a final report, concluding, guess what? Guess what? He published it the next spring. He concluded that there was no problem with homosexuality in the clergy in his diocese, no problem whatsoever. Everything was great. And of course, no link whatsoever to gay clergy and clerical sex abuse. Nothing. And just a few years later in San Diego, after approximately 500 sex abuse lawsuits were filed against the San Diego diocese, the diocese under McElroy filed for bankruptcy. Now, here's a story Cardinal McElroy would love for everyone to forget. Did you know that his Diocese of San Diego was the first one, as far as I know, to employ a pastoral associate, a fully paid position, making him a diocesan employee? That, as far as I know, they're the very first diocese to employ a man that he knew was in a very public same-sex marriage. I mean, it was bad enough that this man was heavily involved in his parish. He was actually a paid employee, a pastoral associate, a leader in the church, with keys to the church and authority over other Catholics in the parish. And his name is Aaron Bianco. We did a lot of reporting on him back in 2017 and beyond. His situation caused a great deal of scandal. Bianco told the Wall Street Journal in 2015 that it was Bishop McElroy who encouraged him in his role in the church. Quote, Aaron Bianco, a 41-year-old openly gay man who had helped run Catholic education programs for 7 years, said that before the bishop's appointment, a parishioner who knew of Mr. Bianco's sexual orientation had complained to the diocese, a traditionally conservative one that once denied the owner of a gay nightclub a Catholic funeral. Let me stop right there and note the absolute dishonesty of that phrasing. The person didn't complain because of his sexual orientation. Nobody cares if you have same-sex attraction, if that's your orientation. Nobody cares about that. What they were scandalized by is that he was in a public same-sex marriage, living a life that was in total opposition to the teachings of the church, and yet leading Catholics in the church and being paid by the church. Okay, going back to the Wall Street Journal. Fearful of losing his job, Mr. Bianco removed his name from the weekly parish newsletter and brought someone in to help him teach. But the new bishop, being McElroy, assured Mr. Bianco that he wouldn't lose his job because he is gay. Once again, totally dishonest phrasing. The complaint was not because he was gay. It's because he was in a gay marriage, in total contradiction to the teachings of the church. He was leading a lifestyle in total contradiction to the teachings of the church, not because he's gay. Bishop McElroy, quote, let me know that being gay should not hinder me from participating fully in the life of the church. So dishonest. So just for a moment, okay, I want you to substitute being gay there with being pro-choice. But instead of just being pro-choice in your beliefs, we're talking about an abortionist. An abortion doctor actually kills babies in abortions. What if the church employed an abortionist? What if a church employed an abortionist, made him a paid diocesan employee, not just that, put him in a leadership position in the church? And people were scandalized, rightly so. And what if they came to their bishop and said, why are you employing an abortionist in our church? Why are you paying him when he's leading a life in direct opposition to church teaching? And what if the bishop said, you shouldn't complain about him because of his pro-choice beliefs, because of his pro-choice tendencies? They'll be utterly dishonest because it has nothing to do with his beliefs or his tendencies. It has to do with his actions. In the same way, people complain about Bianco because of his actions, his very public actions that were scandalizing the faithful. Now, McElroy decided to push the boundaries and make a test case out of Bianco. At least that's what it seemed like. By seeing whether Catholics would accept a gay married man as a paid diocesan employee and pastoral associate and church leader. Not just that, an out and proud gay man who was promoting the dissident group New Ways Ministry. New Ways Ministry. They've been censured by the church, by the Vatican, and by the U.S. bishops because they're not considered a faithful ministry to homosexuals. They are dissident. And yet here he was promoting them at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church. Under Father John Dolan, who was parish priest at the time, notorious pro-gay priest at a notorious pro-gay parish. Now, Father John Dolan is Bishop John Dolan, assigned to Arizona under Pope Francis. But at St. John the Evangelist parish, Bianco was tasked with founding the LGBT ministry, which he led. He wielded so much power at that parish that parishioners secretly called him Bishop Aaron. They knew he had the full backing of Bishop McElroy. In fact, Bianco came out and said so publicly that McElroy backed him 100%, his words. A parishioner spoke to church militant at the time, back when I was a reporter there, and they told us Bianco's persecution of faithful Catholics. A group of faithful Catholics would meet before daily mass to pray the Rosary. They actually got locked out of the church by Bianco. This is what we reported at the time. Quote, for his part, Bianco put an end to the Rosary before daily mass, falsely asserting that parishioners were bothered by it. According to Jessen, that's the name of the person who spoke with us, those who arrived early for mass were devotees of the Rosary. They arrived early specifically to pray the Rosary together. To keep the Rosary group out, Bianco ordered a church volunteer to keep St. John the Evangelist doors locked until 5 minutes before daily mass. Participants asked if they could pray the Rosary in the church cry room, but Bianco refused. But the Rosary group refused to disband. For weeks, they met every afternoon outside the church to pray. Jessen told church militant that Dolan and Bianco thought the daily Rosary people would go away, but they continuously showed up every day before Mass and prayed the Rosary in the parking lot. God bless them. The devotees were not allowed to resume praying inside the church until Dolan's successor was appointed, and that would be Father Kevin Casey. He didn't understand why there were Catholics praying in the parking lot before Mass. He didn't understand why they were not allowed back inside the church. Apparently, Bianco was not able to give a rationalization for it, and so they were eventually allowed back in. Does it surprise you at all that someone living in an openly gay lifestyle in a gay marriage would not want the Rosary prayed around him? Does that surprise you in any way at all? They don't want the rosary, the weapon, according to Padre Pio, the spiritual weapon, to be prayed in the church or anywhere near them? Of course not. Parishioners also claim that they saw a pamphlet containing abortion information on a table in the sacristy after Bianco arrived. Now, Bianco denies, if I remember correctly, he denies that he had anything to do with that pamphlet. Okay, maybe so, but this is what parishioners witnessed. Why was there a pamphlet containing abortion information in the sacristy? And this was after Bianco arrived. Why was he promoting New Ways ministry? And so we reported on it, LifeSite News did, Lepanto Institute did, and the diocese was flooded with complaints by Catholics who were so scandalized that the bishop would employ a gay married man leading a life in total opposition to church teaching as a pastoral associate. You know that he was even giving marriage prep to couples? He was giving marriage prep. Unbelievable. And then he staged what I think, okay, my opinion, I think these were fake hate crimes.
The USD theology professor endured months of harassment and death threats. There was also vandalism.
Throwing Molotov cocktails into the church. So yes, I take them very seriously.
Bianco eventually resigning as pastoral associate at the church. 4 years later, he submitted a paper for an international conference in Rome on love. The day after presenting, he was invited by the Pope for a brief meeting at the Vatican.
Very nervous to meet the Pope. But immediately when he grabbed my hand, it was like you were with your grandfather.
Pope Francis told Bianco he knew of his story.
I asked, would you please pray for me because the work is needed? And he said, I will pray for you, and the work is needed, so you cannot stop doing the work.
He essentially later on resigned, and this is the email that he wrote to his friends on October 19th, stating this. Quote, as most of you know, I've endured physical and emotional violence from groups like Church Militant and LifeSite News for the past year and a half. As I wrote earlier in the week, they have slashed my tires, left me death threats, physically attacked me outside of Mass, and sent hundreds of letters, phone calls, and emails. This was totally outrageous because Church Militant had literally nothing to do with any of those charges. In fact, I fact-checked Bianco at the time. He claimed his tires were slashed in the weeks leading up to the October 10th, 2017 LGBT Mass, and he blamed us for it. Well, the problem is, Church Militant didn't publish our report on that Mass until October 9th, long after his tires were allegedly slashed. No, we did not slash his tires. We did not leave death threats. We did not physically attack him anywhere, much less outside of Mass. All we did was report on his situation. That's it. We did our jobs. We reported on it. So what he said about us was clearly a lie. And he provided zero evidence for his claims because an investigation was launched into so-called hate crimes, but no suspect ever turned up. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why no suspect was ever found. Could it be that the so-called hate crimes were staged? Could it be that they were fake? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. Bianco played his victim card to the max. He went to the media, he cried about how he'd been harassed and hounded out of his job by these evil Catholics, that he was forced to resign in fear for his safety. And a lot of the liberal media, they just lapped it up. Article after article after sympathetic article, reporting on the poor gay man run out of town by the alt-right. And of course, Father James Martin had to jump in, taking Bianco's side, vilifying us and other Catholic media outfits that did nothing more than factually report on Bianco's scandalous situation, allowed and promoted by Bishop McElroy. Of course, I never bought Bianco's claims for a hot second. I think he's just a sad, lonely, unfulfilled man who needs to be the victim, when in fact it was he and the bishop who were victimizing faithful Catholics. And McElroy continues to victimize faithful Catholics, but now from a far more powerful perch. And you know what Bianco did after he resigned? Being the vindictive little man that he was, he filed a hate crimes complaint against Church Militant with the Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nessel, who happens to be a lesbian in a same-sex marriage. So she, of course, immediately launched an investigation into our media organization to see if we were guilty of any hate crimes. Why was our crime? We reported on Aaron Bianco and Bishop McElroy in San Diego. Clearly, the First Amendment and free speech mean nothing to this man because he wanted to shut us down over the mere fact of our reporting. But after several weeks, we received confirmation from the Michigan Attorney General's office that they had closed the investigation because they couldn't find evidence of any offense. Imagine, no evidence that we committed or were in any way involved in the hate crimes in San Diego, contrary to Bianco's false claims. And guess what else? Concerned Catholics raised the scandal of Bianco's employment in the diocese during every single listening session with Bishop McElroy. Every single one. Catholics stood up and they complained about Bianco. Now, this is before he resigned. Now, during one of them, you know how McElroy reacted? He jumped down the throat of one of the Catholics who raised this issue, and he told her to be quiet, that she'd gone too far simply for raising the issue. He accused her of attacking an employee of the diocese, when all she did was rightly raise concerns that an openly gay married man was running the show at one of his parishes. Absolutely unbelievable. And you know what else? Armed guards apparently rushed her and tried to haul her out of there once again for asking challenging questions of this bishop. You wonder why? You wonder why laity are so angry at their bishops. Not all of them, but against some of them, and rightly so, because this is how they're treated, with utter and total contempt. Like I said, listening sessions were a total joke. Everybody knew it. Now, occasionally I'll see comments from people saying, oh, why doesn't Pope Leo just remove the cardinal? What's wrong with the Pope? Why can't he just get rid of him? Now, granted, Leo is not the one who appointed Cardinal McElroy. Pope Francis was. But it is true, he has the power to remove him. He has that power. The Pope can do pretty much anything. He has the power. So why doesn't he? Well, while the Pope has the power to do anything, typically the Pope is going to follow canon law. He's going to follow canonical procedure, especially Pope Leo. Pope Leo is a trained canon lawyer. He's a canonist. He has great respect for canon law. He's methodical. He wants to follow the process. He's not, and I saw this right away, he's not a revolutionary. He's not the sort of person to come in and shake things up, turn things upside down and inside out, and create revolution. That could be more fairly attributed to someone like Pope Francis. Pope Francis was not a canonist. He did go in, he was called a revolutionary, and he did want to shake things up, and he did in fact shake things up. Pope Leo's not that sort of person. He doesn't have that personality. Like I said, great respect for canon law, very methodical, very deliberate, and I think in some ways a bit, perhaps, wanting to be slower rather than rushing in and wanting to do things. And canonically, in normal cases, bishops generally are not removed from their dioceses without proof that they've committed some grave canonical offense or crime. And as far as we know, that hasn't happened yet with Cardinal McElroy. Removing altar rails is not a canonical crime. He has the right to do that if he wants in his diocese. Now, people may not like it. A lot of people don't like it. People may question it, whether it's prudent. People may question his reasoning about so-called safety concerns, as I do. But it's not a canonical crime. It's not enough to remove him. So it's really not as simple as, oh, the Pope should just get rid of him. It's not that simple. If you know of a canonical crime that Cardinal McElroy has committed, and you have proof of it, then you should submit that to the Vatican. You have the right to contact the Vatican. There's an address. You can write them. You can submit complaints about clergy. You have the right to do that. So if you have proof of that, come forward, do it. But clergy do have rights under canon law. And, the irony here is that arguably Cardinal McElroy violated the canonical rights of Monsignor Stephen Rossetti, the archdiocesan exorcist, when he abruptly removed him. I reported on this, a couple of weeks ago. He claimed that Rossetti gravely undermined the church's very precise teaching on the devil, demons, and spiritual warfare. How exactly? Well, the church has no position on aliens, You're allowed to believe whatever you want about aliens, as long as it's in line with the rest of the magisterium. And so if you want to believe that they're actual real beings that exist out there somewhere, you have the freedom to believe that. If you want to believe that they're actually demonic manifestations, as multiple exorcists believe, you can believe that too. So exactly how Monsignor Rossetti gravely undermined the church's very precise teaching on the devil, demons, and spiritual warfare, Cardinal McElroy did not explain. And, Father Gerald Murray, who is a canon lawyer, implies that Monsignor Rossetti might have a canonical case for unjust removal. Watch.
The Archbishop asserts that this is grave violation of Catholic teaching. You have to cite the teaching, because the idea that a priest who thinks that UFOs are a manifestation of a demonic power, that's not forbidden in Catholic theology. Now, whether he's right or not, that's another question. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But these are grave consequences that he suffered. His name has been impugned. He lost his office. His institution, he says he's going to move it to another place. In other words, the thing he was doing, the diocese supported that. So that should not happen without clear proof that the charge is actually a valid charge.
So now that McElroy is in Washington, D.C., he appears to be trying to keep a lower profile. Yes, he'll get on 60 Minutes to talk about immigration, but I think he's trying not to draw as much media scrutiny as he did in San Diego. And he probably wasn't expecting the news of his ultra-rails policy to blow up in the media, but it has. And Catholics are, of course, upset about it. Now, he did announce last year that he had liposarcoma. And he underwent surgery in November to remove the cancerous growth. And he is now evidently cancer-free. He's not receiving any treatments. Having said that, though, I have noticed that he looks much more frail these days than he did just a few years ago in San Diego. He's noticeably lost a lot of weight. He just looks more frail in the way that he walks. Sometimes he even looks a little confused. And I think it's important that we pray for him. It's important that we pray for his soul. I mean, that should go without saying. But sometimes we forget. We spend a lot of time complaining about these prelates and talking about the scandal that they've caused, and we don't spend enough time praying for their souls. And they need it more than anybody else. They really do. Because they're the ones who have to stand before God one day, just like all of us do. We have to stand before God alone and give an account of every single thought, word, and deed of our entire lives. We have to stand before the just and merciful judge and give an account. And on that day, we cannot make excuses. McElroy will not be able to make excuses. I will not be able to make excuses. You watching this will not be able to make excuses. God sees all. He knows all, including the things that we thought we could keep hidden. He knows all. And we will have to give an accounting. And we need to pray specifically, especially for the princes of the church, the descendants of the apostles, the successors to the apostles, because they carry the greatest burden, because they are responsible for the most souls. And if they have led souls to perdition because of their words and actions, they will face a severe judgment that you would not wish on your worst enemy. So as angry as you are, angry as you may be at Cardinal McElroy and others in the church, you need to pray for their souls because they're in danger. Of course, let's remember to pray for the priests and the laymen of Washington, D.C. who are suffering under this prelate. Catholics breathed a huge sigh of relief when McElroy left San Diego. They were so relieved that he was gone. But now the faithful priests and laity in D.C. have to suffer under his reign. And let's pray it's short-lived. He turned 75 in a few years. He has to submit his resignation letter. I have a feeling the Pope will accept it and not extend his time in D.C. Let's hope and pray anyway. All right, thank you so much for watching and listening. And before I say the great words of St. Joan of Arc, remember that we are on Spotify. Sometimes I like to, when I'm driving, I will listen to podcasts. Sometimes that's an easier way to listen to podcasts. So, I am on Spotify. Find us there under Forward Boldly. I'm also on Rumble if you prefer to watch there. Of course, YouTube. We're also on Instagram and yes, even on TikTok. because, I resisted TikTok for a long time. Because I thought, well, it's for like the really, really young ones. It's for the Zoomers and the Gen A. I'm Generation X. But the young people need to know about these things too. They need to have exposure to these things too. And they're very interested in these things. And so, yes, we are on TikTok and we are getting some engagement on TikTok. And I'm very glad to see that. In fact, I'd say that Gen Z, the younger generation, Generation A now, they actually bring me hope. They bring me a lot of hope for a number of reasons. And I really do believe that the Holy Spirit is working in this younger generation. I think that they're going to help bring about renewal, not just in this country, but also in the church. So we're there. We're on TikTok, Spotify, all these places. We're on Facebook. That's my personal account, Facebook, if you want to follow me. And of course, on X. Okay. And I just want to give a special thank you to the people who have supported us financially. Thank you so much. You people, you are the ones who keep us going. We are a nonprofit. And so we do rely upon your generosity in order to keep going. And it's a very, very small operation that I have right here. It's mainly me really doing everything. And the fact that you're giving to us makes it possible for me to continue doing this. So I thank you so much for those who've supported us. And I also very much thank you for your prayers. Those of you who are unable to support us financially, if you're supporting us through prayers, I could not thank you enough. We truly do covet your prayers. We need them. Okay. In the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward, boldly.